Hello and welcome to another Marketing Sherpa webinar. Thank you for joining us today. We've got a great case study about Puma's omni-channel marketing and their efforts to maximize e-commerce growth. So as always, we want to hear from you, interact with you. So as we go through today's webinar, be sure to follow #SherpaWebinar, which we'll be monitoring for any questions, observations, or feedback you might have. So also on Sherpa Webinar, we will be sharing related resources for today's Puma webinar, such as these with you. With us today, we have Tom Davis, the Global Head of E-commerce at Puma. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, thanks a lot for being here. Yeah, I lost connection for a little bit, so I'm not sure what happened, but glad to be here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for joining us. So, Tom, now I'm sure everyone is familiar with Puma. It's a globally recognized brand, but tell us a little bit about the company from your perspective.
Yeah, so Puma is, hopefully most everybody knows, is a lifestyle and sports brand. We're based out of Germany. It's been around for about 70 years, and the size and scope of the business is it's about $4 billion annually. So it's a pretty good-sized retailer with a pretty good market share across the world. And so, other than that, I can go into the fact that I've been here for about 3.5 years, and we've been doing a lot of exciting projects here to get ready for kind of what we're seeing and talking about today in terms of omni-channel marketing and basically taking our business global from an e-commerce standpoint.
Your global marketplace complexity is basically have Puma versus the world here, is what it looks like.
Sure. Yeah, I think for us it's pretty easy at Puma. I mean, I think the biggest thing for us is trying to identify where we fit in the marketplace, and I think there's a lot of struggles for brands out there to try to figure out how they enter e-commerce, not only from a domestic point of view, but also globally. And how do you set up your own business from a direct-to-consumer point of view, but also how do you play in let's call it the omni-channel world of multiple channels, multiple touch points, and multiple customer interactions, and that's what we struggle with today. And I'd be the first to say that we're struggling. It's not an easy. There's no silver bullet for trying to figure this out, but we're trying to align ourselves to tackle this environment.
All right, and so why is copy and paste not an option for Puma right now?
Well, what we've seen is going global and taking our business, at least from the direct-to-consumer point and the e-commerce point, is that the world's, obviously, it seems simple, but it's different. The U.S. is not Europe. Europe's not the U.S. The U.S. is certainly not China or Japan. So when you start to go out to these new markets and you start to realize how consumers interact not only from a multi-channel point of view, but specifically an e-commerce point of view, the ecosystems of e-commerce in each of these new markets just is different. And so if you try to enter those markets with what I call a cut and paste approach, meaning you take what you've done in the U.S., you take what you've done in Europe, and you try to drop that kind of construct into some of these new emerging markets, they're not going to be as efficient or even successful. And I definitely have learned that the hard way of trying to force kind of some of our businesses into some of these regions, using kind of what we've done here in the Western countries, and it has not been as successful as you would think.
Yeah, requires very nimble marketing, moving from place to place, and I love this slide. Successful brands will heart data.
Yeah, and this is another big kind of eye-opening piece for us as we've started to go global and started to learn, how our business reacts and competes, is that I think it's imperative for brands, especially retail brands that may have a wholesale part of their businesses, to really embrace the data. And that's something that, especially you take a complex marketplace, going back to, retail and marketplaces, you can't do control, copy and paste, and then to get through that, you've got to weed through the data, and you have to really embrace that.
Yeah. So jumping into mobile from there, so what's the big picture with mobile, really? Where's it heading?
Yeah, I mean, so this is kind of, adds more complexity to what we see out there, which is obviously the mobile penetration is proliferating, and I think here in the U.S. we see that quite well with iPhones and Androids. But when you get to the other parts of the world, whether it's Europe or Asia, what we're seeing is that we're probably only about a third of the way through the growth of mobile. And what we're going to start seeing is that it's becoming, ubiquitous here in the States or in Europe, but as you get into places like China or India or even Africa, a lot of these people haven't even transferred or transitioned from kind of feature phones or the old, basically simplistic Nokia phones or Motorola phones. And what we're going to see over, probably the next 5 to 10 years is just an amazing amount of growth in just mobile usage, which seems pretty straightforward, but when you put the numbers together, you're going to see 3 to 4 times growth happen in the smartphone market, and which really starts to get us to think about making mobile first and really starting to realize that, or what I like to say, to be a little dramatic, is that, the era of the PC is kind of ending. And I think you can see that with some of our growth, and I have a slide here just to show you kind of how our mobile penetration is looking to this point in time, and how far it's saturated the way our e-commerce business works today. Obviously, what this shows is if you look at the gray bars against the blue bars, the gray bars are last year's mobile penetration, meaning the percentage of our unique visitors that came to our properties last year compared to what we've seen the penetration rate this year through Q1. And you can see in almost every market our mobile penetration is growing. And obviously in North America, where almost 50% of our unique visitors are coming to our e-commerce business through a mobile phone, which is just staggering to me, because 2 years ago, this was maybe 15%.
Wow. And so this is just quarter 1. So for the whole of 2014, you're probably anticipating the difference is going to be even greater.
Yeah, I think what we'll see is when we get in through Q4, you'll probably see this North America tip over 50%, and then Europe will climb into the 40% range. So, if you think about that, and those are our 2 major markets at the moment, 40 to 50% of our web traffic is mobile first, which is just staggering to me. And I was just going to say thanks for switching that. A case in point here is the other night I was preparing and just doing a little homework for this session, and already you can see this is Europe in the middle of the night their time, and as I said, their numbers are creeping up into the 40% range already, and this is just the other night where they're almost at 50%. So it's happening faster than I would have ever thought it would be. So having a mobile first priority position, or it's a priority in your multi-channel or even e-commerce strategy, is paramount and should be priority number 1 at this point.
So yeah, this is something that marketers, we've been talking about it, I feel like, for a really long time in the e-commerce sphere, but it's one of those things that's not theory anymore. It's happening right now.
Yeah, it's reality, and I'd say well over 50% of our emails are being opened on mobile at this point, and that's what's driving that mobile usage from a unique visitor standpoint. But going. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. We just had a slide. We had a question from Paul, that I think applies here. What percentage of Puma's sales are online globally in Europe, U.S., and Africa?
Oh, well, I'd love to disclose that, but I can't because we're a public company. But I think it's fair to say that we're commensurate in terms of proportion to kind of other competitors in market, which I'm sure you can figure out who our direct competitors would be. But we are a wholesale brand, and so of the $4 billion of turnover that we do a year, probably 70-80% of that is wholesale, and the rest of that is quote unquote retail. And so we're part of that retail business, if you will. So unfortunately, I can't disclose that number, but it's still, in the scheme of things, a pretty significant number.
Okay, well, let's jump into Puma's global business footprint here.
Yeah, so this maybe is a good tie-in to that question, which is, this is kind of how our business, from the total business at Puma, kind of spreads out across the world. It's fairly even between the 3 major regions, and I'm consolidating the Americas and Europe and Middle East and Africa, but you can see it's almost a third, maybe a little less than APAC. But when we looked at our e-commerce business, we noticed that it wasn't obviously as equal in terms of market share. We were really focusing on the Americas and Europe, and we were leaving out and neglecting some of these other amazing markets that were growing. So, to go to the next slide, before we were taking our business global, one of the big things that we had to do is consider our own internal, or what I considered looking in the mirror. It's great that the global marketplace is there, it's booming, that's great, but were we physically and mentally set up to take advantage of what was coming at us, almost like 60 miles per hour in the face, it seems like at times. And we've really felt that there's three challenges for us to set ourselves up to be successful, not only from an e-commerce point of view, but from a multi-channel point of view. And those really relate into, we needed to unify our brand experience, and I'll talk about that in a second. We had to really improve and adopt a philosophy around product information. And then last, but not least, is our structure needed to reflect and be what I consider congruent with what the marketplace was dictating. And we had to address that issue head on.
All right, well, now before we go into those challenges, if you're enjoying hearing Tom speak on this webinar, coming up on May 18th in New York City is the IRCE Focus Brands in B2B event, where he will be a keynote speaker. So using that code up in the corner there, MS14, you can save 25% on your ticket to the event, where there'll be other noteworthy speakers like Tom sharing their expertise and insights into what's happening in the world of B2B and B2C e-commerce, discussing strategies for brands, manufacturers, wholesalers, and ways to more effectively manage your direct-to-consumer relationships, channel complexity, and digital marketing. And bookending that event will be the MarketingSherpa Marketing Experiments Web Optimization Summit 2014. There are only 2 more weeks, and our team is very excited to head to the Time Center in New York City to kick off. So you'll hear e-commerce and subscription case studies there from brand-side marketers just like you, giving tactical takeaways that you can take directly back to your office. So we wanted to let you know that this is also your final opportunity to save on tickets with our last chance pricing. So if you purchase by tomorrow, May 8th, you can save $100 on your tickets using that link below, marketingsherpa.com/WOS2014. Okay, well, now Tom, let's jump right into that first challenge, unifying brand and e-commerce experiences.
Yeah, exactly, and I'll try to pick up some time here just because we had some technical difficulties. But I think that this goes without saying, if we jump ahead, one of our big things was to do is we were a traditional wholesaler, so we had a big marketing arm, and then we had kind of our e-commerce arm, and they didn't really see eye to eye because we were kind of trying to cater to 2 different markets. So one of the big missions that we had was to create what I call a unified website. So when we think about that and we looked at the marketplace, most of our competitors or people in the lifestyle section of retail had made this decision already, which was they had taken their business and they had moved from kind of 2 or 3 different websites into one, what we would call flagship or global brand site, if you will. So Puma still today is just at the tip of moving in this direction, and we just started this process about 18 months ago, and we're just rolling it out, which is we had to make the concerted decision to separate, or to integrate our brands and to stop being separated, to kind of go where we're going. And then on top of that, not only do we have to bring our site together, but we had to bring it together in a way that we were able to take advantage of a multi-device world. So you take together brand and e-commerce and then turn it on its head and say, okay, then we've got multiple form factors, and then of course you make it more complex with being in a global marketplace. So it exponentially gets a bit more difficult, but we had to make that and swallow that pill, if you will, to move forward, to get that done first before we could move forward. And then, as I said, 2 out of 3, the second one was really going through and improving the product information. And this is kind of where my passion lives at times, and people think I'm a little bit nuts, but I call this my John Bon Jovi theory. To anybody who loves Slippery When Wet.
I don't know why more marketers don't bring John Bon Jovi in as a metaphor. I love it.
No, I mean, I think it's something that will stay with people, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I say it tongue in cheek, but it's you know, I think there's, you know, famous great line from one of the songs, which is it's all the same, only the names change. And I say that out of respect of the song, of course, because, you know, it is a wonderful song, Dead or Alive. But really, because what I've seen over my career is that if you take any sort of industry that we do in our business, you know, and I'll take this from kind of, let's call it the search engine world. It's over time, since like the early mid-90s and going through today, whether it's AOL or Lycos or LookSmart or Google or Facebook or whatever, you know, the information that's still coming out of these channels is pretty much the same. It's just reconstructed in a new way. And so what's really the constant here is really the news or the information or the email. It's the channel that or the channel, I guess, that you're going to get that information changes. And that's kind of where we think as a brand, or I at least like to think about Puma. And it's the same when we think about e-commerce, which is whether, you know, in the late 90s you were using Intershop or Blue Martini, or in the mid 2000s you're in the IBM or ATG world, or even now where you're getting into the SaaS models, you know, the names are changing, but it's all the same, meaning that for us to be strategically nimble in this global market, we need to own our product information. And why that's so important is that it allows us to move between these channels or e-commerce vendors or marketplaces or advertising channels very quickly. It's when you get tied into these channels and you have no way out, you become paralyzed. And I think in today's market, you have to own this data because the names are going to change. So if you know that going in and you can own your stuff and you can own your information, my philosophy is the constant that goes through all of these, you know, the last 2 decades has been product information. So managing your product information, to me, is one of the key pillars of our strategy to be agile in this global market, especially when you start going into the multi-channel world.
Okay, great.
And, sir, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Let's jump into your final channel on challenge, optimizing internal structure.
Yeah, and then last but not least, it's the final, but probably the most, you know, truest, you know, the truism to what we need to do is that, you know, it's a global marketplace. Puma serves all these markets, and the way we were handling our e-commerce business before I came on board was that it was very decentralized, and we had, you know, 8 or 9 teams around the world. You know, we were competing in lots of different markets. We were handling, you know, 8 languages, 9 currencies. We were using Demandware. We've got Magento. We've got third-party platforms. It was all over the place. And that seemed good at the time, maybe 10 years ago, but there was no synergy between any of these teams. They were working independently. So what we decided to do was make the concerted effort, again, to align ourselves with the way our markets were moving. And by doing that, we really focused on centralizing the brand, centralizing the e-commerce efforts that we're doing from a global position, which is where I sit, and I sit in Boston. And then what we did is kind of created 3 major hubs around the world. So for the Americas, we have the North American team. In Europe, we have a European team. And in APAC, we have teams in Asia. And that what we're trying to do is align ourselves to work with the marketplace, but also be efficient for the brand. So, you know, centralizing the business was we made a conscious decision to do this, and it was not one taken lightly at all. So it was something that we defined to be successful. You know, so, you know, in essence, it was centralizing the team. It was building a global team, which is where I sit. And then what we were doing is creating, if you will, regional teams or centers of excellence around the world in our key major markets. And this really helped us get to a place where we made sure that e-commerce was first. It was a e-commerce first mindset. And we felt that this was something that was going to break down the barriers between retail and the brand, because when you're working in the world of e-commerce or multi-channel, the consumer will never see the difference between the brand and commerce. They just see the experience of the brand. And we had to break this discipline down, and the best way we thought possible was to take this into a global structure to be efficient for the marketplace and our consumers, of course.
Okay, we have a question. Does your e-commerce platform provide for product fitting online and returns if they don't fit? From Paul.
In returns, and my assumption is returns. Well, of course we take returns. So I think to be even competitive in the marketplace today, online shopping, you need to be able to facilitate returns. And I think the next big, and what we're seeing now, not the next big, but it's here today, is really, can you return omni-channel or even multi-channel? And I'll probably stick with multi-channel as my example. The ability to buy something online, if it doesn't fit, you can return it through the mail or you can take it to a physical store. So our software does allow for that. You just have to make sure that I think it's actually more of a business process decision rather than an e-commerce decision. It's that you have to have alignment between your e-commerce business or your digital business and your storefront business to make sure that they're able to take returns. And once they do take a return, how do you credit the customer? Where does that product go? Do they even have the facilities in the stores to mail these returns back to a central distribution center? So e-commerce-wise, I think most systems will handle that now. It's more of a business process and a business process decision of how you want to handle that.
So that's a small example of all the small things that you had to make sure were in line and were working together in all of the different areas that Puma was working in, and it had to go down to that minute of a level.
Absolutely, and then that's going back to the global structure. That's one of the reasons that we really push that way, because whether in the past with 8 or 9 different teams working independently, they each had their own business process. So it was very inconsistent market to market. And then so what was happening is if you were in Europe shopping or even in Germany shopping and you go to France to shop, the experience and the e-commerce experience was different. And we had to centralize and standardize what we did. And obviously you have caveats to that in local markets for different things, but we had to come up with business processes internally that worked for us globally to set kind of a standard for what we're doing. And I'll be honest, we're still working through those because you have to go through all those use case scenarios and figure out what the customer wants and what they're desiring. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We have to wait for it to kind of unveil itself in a real world setting.
Yeah. All right. Well, Tom, going through this whole journey of meeting all the challenges we've just kind of gone through, tell us, what can the marketers listening to this webinar take away from what you've accomplished and apply to their own efforts?
Well, I think, first and foremost, as I was just talking about, getting internal and external alignment, whether it's structure, strategy, and/or your goals or success factors, need to be aligned. If the outside world's saying one thing, but your internal setup is completely the opposite, you're probably going to run into a lot of frustrations. And so I urge people to say, think about, honestly, is your structure set up to be successful in today's marketplace? So that would be the first thing I would challenge everybody with. As I said earlier, the mobile-first economy is here. I call it the PC era is over, in my opinion. I think within the next 12 to 18 months, we're already seeing it in sales in the real world. If you go to Dell or Apple, maybe not Apple, but Dell or any of the big computer companies, their sales have been sliding for the last 2 years. And I still think we have 2/3 more growth to happen in this mobile world. And I think you're going to see companies within the next 12 months start with all of their design and consumer interactions, start with a mobile phone, and then they will build backwards into tablets, into PC. And we're at that point where there's so much traffic in the mobile world that it's almost antiquated to build a website first for a PC. And then obviously number 3 is what I was talking about when you're going global and thinking multi-channel. It's don't just think about your brand site. That's your xyz.com site. I would say 2/3 of the world doesn't even understand the concept of a brand site. If you go into China specifically, nobody would go to Puma.com on their own. It just does not happen. They go to other marketplaces such as Tmall, and that's how they do their shopping. That's the commonplace. You cannot just think brand. You have to think multi-channel touch points in the digital world as well as the figurative world. And then last but not least, I truly believe the best retailers going forward, or the best brands going forward, are going to shift and become more analytics companies. And what I mean by that is that they're going to love data. They're going to consume the data, and they're going to make better consumer decisions or better strategic decisions for their consumers. And you're already seeing that with companies like Walmart or Amazon or even Staples, who are creating these kind of labs out in the Silicon Valley area. But even a brand like Nike, if you go check the headlines, they're buying analytics companies. And that's for their own consumption internally, to know how to build products and design products that will, satiate their customers. And I truly believe that's going to happen for the best retailers going forward over the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, great. Well, we're all out of time for today. Tom, thank you so much for speaking with us, and thank all of you for attending as well. I want to apologize for the difficulties we had at the beginning, but I think we got to a lot of great information, and be sure to fill out the survey. Tell us what worked, what didn't, what you want to see more of to help us continue to improve and evolve these webinars for you. Thank you again. Thank you, Tom.
You bet. And again, I apologize if my phone was cutting in and out. So, but I'm glad I was able to push through that. And good luck to everyone on the phone.
Thank you.